Welcome to the Awakening Man's Code podcast. I'm Khalid Malik in this edition of the Awakening Man's podcast. My brothers, this is a space for you where you get to be heard, where you get to be the man that you already are, free from distractions. And this is a space for you, my brothers. This is a space built on compassion and love. What does it mean to be a man today in today's world? Joining us is a very special guest. I love how he describes himself on his Instagram page, a freedom architect. What does that mean exactly? He is here to empower you today. Our guest, Ryan Thomas Frace. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, how are you?
I love it. Freedom architect. FYI, Ryan right now is in Indonesia, Bali. Hot, humid. What's it like right now?
Oh yeah, definitely hot towards the end of the rainy season. So it rains pretty much every day, but beautiful weather for sure.
Well, I love that kind of hot, humid, rainy kind of weather. As I said at the outset, you're a freedom architect. What does that mean exactly when you say you're a freedom architect?
I've spent so much of my life living in prisons, mental prisons that I put myself in or society has put me in. And I've gone through a lot of processes of breaking free of a lot of those prisons. So when I say freedom architect, I have tried to design my life to create as much freedom as humanly possible. And that's also what I do when I work with people, is helping them create a sense of freedom, because so many people are not living free. They're living in constrained, confined realities that aren't necessarily them living the best life that they could.
And I love it, the analogy and the visual of prison, of mental prisons. And I think men today, more than ever, are in multiple prisons, in multiple mental prisons, and they seem to be prison hopping. If it's not one prison, then it's to the next, and then to the next, and it's a continuous sort of transition from prison to prison. And I love it. Maybe we could use that as sort of springboard into the conversation as to how we can even begin to free ourselves from those mental prisons. But before we get there, just a brief sort of background to set the context as to where you're coming from. According to you, you've spent 27 years living your life, perhaps in those mental prisons. Can you tell us about what your rock bottom was like, or those, many rock bottoms before you finally recognized, wait, hold on, this is just not what I'm supposed to be doing right now?
Yeah, the biggest realization that I had back then was I had an amazing weekend on the beach, playing with friends and having a really good time, and just feeling very free, feeling very expanded. And then the next day I start driving to the office and I was miserable. And I was thinking to myself, like, how could I go within 24 hours feeling super free, super, happy about life in general? And then to the very next day, feeling remarkably depressed to the point that I was crying in my car driving to work. And that was the point that I realized that the work that I'm doing and the way that I was living my life was not actually aligned with what I'm actually here to do. And so I, from that point forward, started to deconstruct the life that I just kind of wound up in at that time, and started to reconstruct my life from the ground up, around the principles and the morals and the overall lifestyle that I desire to create for myself.
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of us, a lot of the men, and even women to some extent, in fact, everyone really, we tend to be in places we don't want to be. Specifically, and I'm speaking about when we're talking about people's jobs or men and their jobs. I speak to so many men who tell me they wish, we're talking about men who are sort of higher up in the chain of corporate, the corporate ladder. And they inevitably will come back to, I always wanted to be a musician, or I always wanted to be this, or I always wanted to travel. Well, then why are you miserable in your 9 to 9 job? Forget 9 to 5, 9 to 9 job. I've got to support my family. I've got to be practical about this. I've got to be logical about this. Like, what do you say to them who are so deep, sort of, neck deep in self chatter that is self-negating and that is sort of self-reprimanding?
Sure. Well, I think the number one regret that most people have when they're on their deathbed is they did not live the life that they wanted to live. They lived the life that other people wanted them to live, whether it was their parents or society or friends. And so when you can realize that maybe the life that you're living is actually not the life that you want to be living, and you're just doing it because it's expected of you by your parents or by your society, you start to question, do I really want to keep doing this, or do I want to carve my own way? Do I want to create an entirely new life for myself that is not necessarily in, just living in an office all day of your
Yeah.
life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ryan, I just say that, there's a psyche with a man that says, I must protect my
Sure.
family, I must
Oh, yeah.
provide for my family.
Hmm.
And in that, and if you couple that with, a sort of a dead end job, or a job that I really don't want to be in, but I'm here because it gives me money, and I can provide and protect those very two things.
Mm.
There's a burden. There's like a ton of bricks on a man's shoulders,
Yep.
because the men I speak to often say, "Well, I'm burdened. I feel pressured. I feel like I just don't have any breathing space." How
Mm.
can one sort of begin to unburden themselves?
Well, the question is, who is doing the burdening? Is it the burdening from the parents or from the boss, or is it actually oneself that is causing that burden or that pressure? Because if it is this external pressure that you're experiencing, maybe your parents are giving you pressure, maybe it's your family, maybe it's your friends, just simply creating some space between you and those people. Now, if it's yourself that you're feeling stressed or you're burdened because you feel like you have these responsibilities as a man to provide or to
Yes.
be there for
Protect.
your family,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Then you can start to question, are these things that are actually real, or are they just kind of made up in my mind? Are they made up in my head? Because maybe my culture communicates to me that I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to make this amount of money in order to provide to my family, I have
Yeah.
to do this type of job. But when we start to question these things, they kind of unravel, and you start to realize that even little micro shifts, even little micro changes can create
Yeah.
pretty significant impacts in one's life. And they don't need to, yeah, it doesn't, we often think that these changes, if we want to create a life where we feel a little bit more free, many
Yeah.
people think, oh, that's so hard to do.
Oh
Oh, that's
yeah.
going to take so much effort. Oh, that's going to be such a big thing. But it's like, no, it's actually not. You just have to take the first initial leap.
Yeah.
You just have to go a little bit there, and then you can continue in that momentum, in that direction.
What is a micro shift? How does one even because we feel overwhelmed as men. We just feel overwhelmed because, well, listen, this is just not, I want to, but I just can't. Not now, not at this stage of my life. Not when I have three kids, and when you know what I mean. So
Right.
how does one even make the micro shift, and what does it even look like?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's different for everyone. It just depends on where you're at in your life. But
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is, at least from my own experience, when I left that life and I went abroad to create a new one, I started to realize that my priorities and the things that I used to value are no longer things that I valued. So
Yeah.
back then, when I was living that life, I was just chasing money, because I thought that that's what you do. You just do a
Yeah.
job to get money, and that's the purpose. And then you use that money to provide for
Well,
your
that's a
family. But
story, right? That's what we've all been told as men, right?
exactly, right. And so if we can at least identify that we've been living under that paradigm that we need to get money to provide, or that's the sole destination. It's like, no, money is energy. Money is a tool that we use to get us where we're going, but it's not the destination. It gives us the fuel to get to the destination. So a lot of this is identifying if we are living in this paradigm of just constantly chasing money, well, starting to question that and starting to deconstruct that so something else can arise, another value can arrive, and then we can start directing our life in that direction.
But when we even attempt to set the direction or set the compass, I feel like men
Sure.
today, and again, the men that I speak to, they're very distracted. And when I say distracted, maybe it's more disconnected.
Mhm.
And it's when we talk about this kind of connection and disconnection, it's considered woo-woo talk. It's considered, oh, come on, get real.
Okay.
Let's talk. What do you talk about being connected to yourself, and
Sure.
how is that going to help me pay my bills?
Sure. Sure.
How
I
do you
mean,
address that?
yeah, well, it's a good question. Let me sit with that for a moment. Well, we can at least acknowledge that when we're living generally in the Western world,
Yeah.
working 9 to 9 jobs, we are not necessarily connected to our deepest selves. There are often times where we're doing things, actions, behaviors that are not centered with our authentic way of being. We're just doing it because we're told to do it, right? And we're obviously not living a lot of our lives connected to nature. So a lot of my work has been, how do we come back to ourselves? How do we come back to our authentic self and make sure that we're making decisions from that space and creating our life from that space? Because if we're trying to create a life not from an authentic place, but from a place that our society told us to do, it's not going to work out too well. We're going to feel unfulfilled. We're going to feel like we're living a life that doesn't have any meaning or no purpose. And so when you say, coming back to ourselves, you mentioned distractions. Men are massively distracted. Men and women are very distracted nowadays. And it's really important that we kind of clear away those distractions so we can see what is naturally arising after that.
Speaking of distractions, I mean, there was a recent study done a few years ago now that men, well, Pakistan or Pakistanis, and I'm assuming, and I'm making an assumption here that men primarily, more than women, were the highest number of subscribers to pornographic sites came out of Pakistan.
Sure.
And I'm sure that's, men generally anywhere in the globe, and their subscription to distractions like pornography is high. And so, what tends to happen is that the man, in an attempt to avoid what's going on inside, will look to these distractions, and pornography is huge. This relationship that men have with pornography, like, how does one sort of, how can we sort of break that down and sort of, tell men, listen, you might want to look somewhere else?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we use these distractions to distract us from looking within. I think the thing that
it's too hard, right? It's just. I mean,
for sure,
it's easy if a little sort of temporary satisfaction, just to get my mind off things.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that one of the hardest things is to face yourself, right? One of the hardest things is to look in the mirror and actually look at yourself and take a deep, hard look at who you are and what you're about. And so many men are terrified of not just looking at themselves, but, experiencing their emotions. That terrifies most men. So what do? We pick up the phone, we pick up social media, we use porn to distract ourselves. But those types of things are just kind of delaying the inevitable and making our relationships in our lives worse, because we are just addicted to not just technology, but addicted to distracting ourselves. And, one of the saddest things in my experience is going on a bus. This doesn't happen here in Bali, but it happened back in Thailand, as well as, back in California, where I would go to a public place and everyone is glued to their phone. No one's bored anymore.
In fact, as you speak, the people behind the camera are glued to their phones.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Yeah, and I have a slight addiction to my phone as well. Like, I get it.
Right.
I've been there, and I'm getting better at it. But if we are constantly trying to distract ourselves from what is most important, which is sitting with oneself and being with oneself, it does lead to a life of meaninglessness and purposelessness. And that's where men especially feel lost, because they don't know why they're here. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. But, again, I want to just, with the men that have come to you who have been addicted to pornography,
sure.
How do you begin with them? Because I know many men who are watching this right now are addicted to pornography. A lot of women who have men in their lives and men who they love are addicted to pornography. How do you begin this sort of what's the word? Unleashing unleashing oneself from that addiction? How do you do it? And do you sort of come across?
It's almost like detaching oneself from that habit or that addiction. It's the chain needs to be broken in a way. So, it's a good question. I think the reason why men are addicted to pornography in particular is because of that stimulation they're receiving. It is a massive amount of dopamine and stimulation. Now, the statistics, I believe, are pornography is the number one cause of divorce. At least I believe it is in the United States, or at least one of the number one reasons for divorce.
Yeah,
And so when
right.
we can just look at the amount of negative impact that pornography has, not just on our own psyche, but our relationships with our women, with our partners,
Yeah,
we can realize that this is not helping us. It's an addiction. It's a habit. I understand it's very addictive. It's designed to be very addictive and
right.
very stimulating. But what it does is it destroys your relationship with your partner, as well as it makes you so overstimulated that when you're with your partner or when you experience a new woman, it's almost like that woman isn't enough because you're so used to being hyperstimulated. Then when you have a real woman in front of you, most men experience like erectile dysfunction because it's not as stimulating as what the computer screen does, because you can
Right.
just click and click and click. So
Right.
the biggest thing is just, I mean, with any habit, we have to replace it with a new habit, right? So instead of just deleting something, you have to delete it and then add something else in. So whatever that is, whether that's meditation, reading a book, I mean, watching social media is better than scrolling through pornography sites.
Yeah.
So any sort of new habit that we can implement and put in replace of that old habit, and then realizing how much, sexual life force energy that we have that we can use to benefit our relationships, not to distract ourselves from relationships,
Yeah.
because that's probably where most men are as well, is that they're using pornography to distract themselves from facing women, to distract
Absolutely.
themselves from getting close to women. It's a lot safer to do it that way. It's safe and easy to do it that way, but it's not, that's the reason why a lot of men are lost and in a sense miserable, because they're
Well,
not
that's sad.
experiencing
That's kind of
connection.
sad, right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Oh, that's that. But how? So when you talk about installing new habits, what
Sure.
is sort of your like strategy, if you will, for anyone that would, that may turn to porn or any other addiction for that matter? It could be,
Yeah.
substance abuse, and porn being another substance. But how does one sort of begin even to install one of these habits?
Yeah.
And that's a heavy question, and
Well,
that's a big question, but
totally.
sort of at least a direction.
You know, I think one of the biggest things nowadays is this addiction to technology. So whether it's pornography or whether it's social media, whatever it may be, it's the technology that we are most addicted to. So if we can do what we can to stop using technology, whether it's certain hours of the day, like for me and my partner, once the sun goes down, we put all technology away. And we
Really?
either read a
Yeah.
book or we,
Yeah.
whatever we do, we light a fire, we light some candles, we have a dinner, or, have some sort of experience, or we go out. But, having technology, especially when the sun goes down, it has a lot of negative impacts on us. And most men are watching pornography late at night as well. So that's another, negative impact that it has on our lives. So just doing what we can to come back to nature, doing what we can to come back to what is most natural. And what is most natural is getting away from technology, putting down the phone and doing something where we are feeling a little bit more connected to the earth.
Yeah. It's
Going
very
on a
interesting to
walk.
say that.
I mean,
It's interesting, according to Islam, there's a teaching of the Prophet that says, if after your night prayer, which is sort of the last prayer as you sort of get into the night, if you haven't got anything constructive to do, then head to bed to your wife, or your wife and you should get together, or head to bed if you've got nothing constructive to do after your night prayer.
yeah,
And it's sort of along the lines, well, listen, it's the sun is down, we're off technology, we're with ourselves. I am with you and you're with me, and we're sort of engaging together. Whether it is intimacy, and that intimacy doesn't have to be physical intimacy. That could be just sharing ideas with each other, or reading a book together, or whatever.
totally.
Sort of your sort of more productive / constructive habit. A
Totally.
lot of women, Ryan, that I speak to also complain that my man isn't intimate with me. And again,
Is it intimate?
he wants to, yeah, not intimate with me. He doesn't.
Oh,
He doesn't touch me. He doesn't compliment me. He's distracted, and he doesn't come to bed at night, like you pointed out. Men
sure.
generally tend to stay up longer, and watch, whether it's trash TV or whether it's porn, or one very common thing that happens here is he's out with the boys.
Mm,
He's out with the boys on a Friday night, Saturday night, and coming back home in the wee hours of the morning.
mm,
We want to talk to the man too, but what would you say to the women who are sort of experiencing this and are trying to get through to their men?
I mean, I think one of the biggest reasons why relationships don't work is due to lack of communication and lack of syncing up on priorities and intentions.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of these women have the desire to connect with their men, with their partners. And it sounds like a lot of the men are either avoiding that or a little bit scared of that type of intimacy. And I feel like that's been a big process with men in general, is just tapping into their intimacy, tapping into their emotions so that they can learn how to connect with their women.
Yeah.
Now, just to speak to the women, to answer your question, I would say that realizing that it's almost like, I wonder if the women need to show the men that it's safe to open up to them.
Yeah.
Because so many men are, I would assume, are pretty concerned with opening up to their women,
Yeah. Well, they're
afraid to
not.
be vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for the to the men, what would you say? Who deep down know that maybe they should be maybe heading to bed or not maybe watching trash TV till 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, or
Sure.
what would you say to them?
Well, you brought up a really good point about consuming versus creating, where a lot of what we are doing on our devices is just receiving information. It's just consuming, it's just consumption, as opposed to actually creating. And there's so much that you can create in your relationship with your woman. You can create amazing experiences, especially in the bedroom, extraordinary experiences, whether that's, learning Tantra or learning new ways to connect intimately. And there's only so much, connection that you can have with your boys. There's a reason why there's women in your life. There's a reason why men and women come together and create this perfect yin and yang in the universe, because when we come together, we create this sense of oneness, and that can
Yeah.
only happen with the other, man to woman, woman to man. And we don't really have that as much when we just hang out with the boys. So there's a massive amount of depth that lies within the feminine that is beautiful to explore. And especially when you find a partner who's willing to explore those depths with you and you're able to explore them with her, the amount of intimacy that you can create and the amount of like soul recognition that you can see between one another is absolutely extraordinary. These are some of the things that me and my partner are diving into nowadays and have been for quite some time. It's just, how much intimacy can we truly experience with one another? How close can we actually feel with one another? And
Yeah.
there's a part of me sometimes where I'm scared. I'm because there's a part of me that's locked up and doesn't want to open up because of fear of being vulnerable or fear of being seen in this particular light. But it's remarkably healing, not just to myself, but a lot of my inner child wounding. We all have inner child wounding that lies within. And when we
Yeah.
can find a partner that we can open up to on that level, we can
Yeah.
heal a lot of our past trauma
Yeah.
that inherently resolves itself in those types of experiences.
Yeah. There's something that you've sort of touched on. If you could just a little more expand on it, because you recently did something on your Instagram page about uh, the masculine and the feminine, and there's a magnetism between the
Yeah.
two energies. How the other is, I think
Yeah.
you said, a part of the whole. Could you just talk about that for a little bit? How my sort of my wife and my husband is a part of, or is a part of the whole, and there is a magnetism that needs to be there for it to sort of work synergetically.
Right. Yeah. Especially when there's not when the polarity is high. So what I mean by that is, like the yin and yang symbol, you can see it's this perfect, perfect synchronization between these two parts. They complement one another. And so that's what the masculine and the feminine is for one another. So when a man is deeply embodied in his divine masculine, and when a woman is deeply embodied in her divine feminine, and they come together, there's this beautiful synergy and this beautiful relationship that can be created. But unfortunately, most people's relationships have a lot of inverted polarity. So, at least in America and in the West, the men have become feminized and the women have become masculinized. So, in
Right.
a way, what occurs is the woman is being the man and the man is being the woman in the relationship.
Mm.
So, what a lot of my work has been is helping people not invert the polarity in the relationship, because it's so much more important for the man to be deeply embodied in his divine masculine and be centered in that, to feel his
Mm.
power, to know his power, and for the woman to be deeply connected with her divine feminine. And unfortunately, a lot of women are not connected to that, whether that's because of contraceptive pills or birth control, or
Right.
a lot of the chemicals and endocrine disruptors that are in our everyday environment. They kind of disrupt our hormones to where we don't actually feel like a man.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's our what is it?
Interesting.
The sperm counts in men are like lowest than they've ever been. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there's the reason why is because so many chemicals and so many endocrine disruptors that are in there. So a lot of what I've also done is just detoxifying a lot of that toxicity that's been built up throughout the years. And as I do that, the more of a man I become, the more deeply grounded in my masculinity I
Nice.
feel.
Yeah.
Mm.
But so how can I embody the the divine masculine, as you put it? What is that? Could you tell us what that
You
is,
know,
and how does a man even? Because you say, I don't feel like a man, whatever that. And
sure.
I think that's another session where we're talking about defining, well, what is a man today? A man isn't now to protect and to provide. That's an old definition. That's an outdated definition. That's an
Yeah.
old story now. But the divine masculine, how do I embody that? It sounds amazing, but how does one? What is it, and how does one do that?
You know, I think it's different for every single person because it
Yeah.
just depends on where you're at in the journey. I know for myself, for example, I was very disconnected with my inner feminine
Yeah.
originally when I was living in California. I wasn't very connected with my emotions. I wasn't connected with, my heart in a way. So a lot of my journey and a lot of what I recommend to people is dropping out of their minds and into their body, because it's in their
Mm.
body that their truest essence lies.
Mm.
We in our everyday society, men and women, are constantly living in the minds, thinking,
Yeah.
analyzing. There's never
Yeah.
necessarily a break between the thought patterns. When we can
No.
start creating a bit more space within our mind, whether that's through meditation or meditative type experiences, and start to break those mental thought patterns, drop out of the mind and start living from a heart-centered space where our intuition guides the way, that's where we're going to feel most deeply in my masculine, and women will feel most deeply in their feminine, is if they're leading from their heart and living as much as they can in their bodies and not from the mind, because the mind is addicted to fear and is addicted to anxiety and is addicted to living in the future, living in the past, and constantly thinking. But that's not who you are. Who you are is your heart. Who you are is,
Mm.
in your body.
In your Instagram, there was a very interesting post about the feminine and the masculine, how one is just a part of the other, or together they come in to form a whole. And they can only form a whole, and there is magnetism between the two. But what
Mm.
we find these days is there's just a repulsion, and the
Sure.
repulsion seems to be taking us further and further away from each other.
Right.
Could you touch on that? I think it's an important piece.
Yeah, definitely. Well, when a man and woman come together, we create this unity, right? We are just opposites of the other, right? So when we come together, we create the one. Um, and it's a little bit like the yin and yang symbol. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's just this
Yeah.
perfect synchronization between the two parts. And that's ultimately what the man and the woman is.
Right.
Now, when with a relationship, a lot of the state of relationships that we have nowadays, people have this inverted polarity where the woman has become a lot more masculine and the man has become a lot more feminine. At least this is the way that it is in the West. And so with that inverted polarity, this magnetism is non-existent. There's no polarity, there's no attraction towards one another, because neither person is deeply embodied in what it is that they are. The women are not deeply embodied in their feminine, and the men are not deeply embodied in their masculine. So it creates a lot of issues within the relationship when we see this inverted polarity. So a lot of my work here has been to get that polarity back into balance so that the man can be the man in the relationship, the woman can be the woman in the relationship, and the two can come together and unite and create an amazing life for themselves.
So we were talking about embodying my masculinity, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about energies here, by the way. We're not talking about
Yeah.
roles that society
Sure.
has set on the masculine and feminine, or the man or the woman, correct? We're talking about an energy
Correct.
here. So how
Correct.
do I embody my sort of divine masculinity? What does that even look like?
Sure. Well, a lot of, the male side of masculinity, meaning the male side of the yin and yang symbol is what I meant to say,
Right.
is a lot of yang type energy. So it's a lot of forward thinking, penetrative, directional, leading type energy, right? Where the feminine is a bit more yin. It's a bit more about surrendering and allowing and allowing things to unfold as they naturally are. So, as it relates to being in your divine masculine, a lot of my work has been helping men discover where their true power lies and helping them harness that because
Yeah.
so many men are walking around feeling powerless, especially in the
Yeah.
relationships, feeling
Yeah.
extremely powerless, feeling like they don't have the ability to direct the relationship in a certain direction and they feel almost resigned about it.
Yeah.
That resignation, that surrendering is the feminine energy. That's the yin energy. So if we can at least acknowledge that these types of energies are playing out in our relationship, we can start to bring new energies into the relationship. So for me, for example, when I'm in a little bit more of a yin energy, a little bit more of just an allowing and not necessarily directional or penetrative type energy, and I'm around my partner, it doesn't really work for her. She doesn't like me when I'm in that energy because I'm not
Right.
leading as the man in the family. And so I'm able to at least quickly acknowledge it and identify it so that I can just kind of snap myself out of it and start leading and start taking initiative and start, pulling her hand and, taking her somewhere. Those types of things help balance out those masculine and feminine energies in a relationship.
Um, what would you give us as men that go back away from this discussion? How as a man can I begin some practical sort of tips and tools perhaps you could share with us on how I can begin to approach that divine masculinity, to be sort of more comfortable in my own skin as a man.
I would say some of the first things is to start connecting with nature, start connecting with your truest
Right.
essence, coming
Mhm.
back to yourself, getting away from the distractions, getting away from the TV, and start implementing new habits in your life, whether it's reading or meditation or stretching or yoga. Um, and then also a lot of the things that I'm recommending as well is having men stop ejaculating, stop masturbating,
Mm.
because in that releasing of their seed, there is a physical release, but there's
So
also a
glad you brought that
massive,
up. Yeah. Sorry, go on. I'm so
massive
glad you brought that up. Yeah.
there's an incredible energetic release that occurs. And so when I stop doing that, and I've heard this from countless men throughout the world,
Yeah.
they start feeling more powerful because we are harnessing that energy a little bit more within ourselves as opposed to constantly releasing it left and right. So that just taking a break from that for a few days up to a few weeks, you will immediately start to feel your power back. You will immediately start to feel your energy back. And it is, one of the easiest solutions to do as a man is to ultimately stop doing something.
So number one, you said get back into nature,
Yeah.
and whether that's physically going out in nature or some form of meditation or some sort of bodily kind of move. Would you include working out in that sort of space as
Oh yeah,
well, or no?
definitely. Yeah, working out is great. Yeah, just any sort of practice that helps us get back into the body, getting out of the mind. So when we're on the devices, it's our mind that's being hyper stimulated, right? If we get out into nature, the mind kind of calms down and we start to live back in the body. And the same thing happens with working out as well. It's a great practice.
And number two, stop ejaculating, stop masturbating so much.
Yes,
Men that I've spoken to also masturbation, but sometimes multiple times during the day.
sure.
And what does it do to us men energetically and perhaps even sort of hormonally? What can that do to us as men if we're ejaculating every day and sometimes even twice a day? What is it doing to us?
There's a physical thing that it's doing, and then there's an energetic thing that it's doing, but they're two are happening simultaneously. So, on a physical level, when you stop ejaculating, I think within a week, your testosterone skyrockets like 60%, something
Right.
along those lines. I don't know the exact, percentage, but your testosterone inherently skyrockets because you are no longer allowing that energy to go away from you, but you are harnessing that energy and spreading it throughout your entire body. So, inherently, you're going to be feeling higher levels of testosterone, which inherently is going to make you feel a lot more of like a man. Now, it's also an energetic aspect, because instead of having this very micro, very acute sensation that's occurring, you are taking that energy and spreading it throughout your entire body. So you're giving life force throughout your entire body. It's not something that you're just giving your life force away. I mean, it's ultimately the most powerful and potent thing on this planet. It creates all life on Earth. Yeah. Exactly. So it's remarkably potent. It's incredibly powerful. And when we stop giving it away and we start, harnessing it within, we have so much more life force energy that's just, spread throughout our entire bodies, and we're able to think clearer. I mean, if you look at every single great inventor in the past, they've all recommended this, whether it was Steve Jobs or Albert Einstein or all of these people, they've all recommended not to ejaculate in order to have heightened levels of not just testosterone, but creativity, inspiration, all of these things that increase as soon as we stop, doing that habit.
I think it's great. Look at what it is that you're doing habitually for a long time, or you've been doing now for a long time. It's probably not working for you. So you might want to look at the alternatives. Ryan, finally, I think men today are going through a redefining, through a transition, and a new way of being, because really there isn't any other way of being except from this new way of being. But what is it? I want to ask you this question. What does it mean to be a man today?
I think a man today needs to learn how to start living from his heart and stop living in his mind. I think that's one of the biggest things for men today, so that they can stop identifying with their ego or stop identifying with these thought forms that they have been addicted to throughout the years, and start getting back in touch with their truest essence. When we're living in the mind, there are all these ideas and these patterns and these programs that are just bestowed upon us through movies or TV shows as to who a man should be and how a man should be. But when we clear all of that, we start to tap into our truest essence, and we get to define what being a man here is. Now, a man is someone who leads. A man has that penetrative directional focus that allows us to go in a certain direction towards a certain goal. But I think the biggest thing is we have to realize that we have to do that in unity with the women, because there are so many women that are at war with men. There are so many men that are at war with women, and that war is not going to lead anywhere. We have to go in this direction together. We have to unite and do it together, because we can't do it separate. We've done that, throughout the generations, and it's not going to work. We got to do it together, and we got to make peace with that.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Ryan Thomas Frace, Freedom Architect. Where can we find you? On Instagram under Ryan Thomas Frace. Where else can we find you, Ryan?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube as well, Ryan Thomas Frace, as well as TikTok, which is Bali_Ryan.
Bali_Ryan. If you're ever in this part of the world, make sure you look us up.
Okay, that sounds great. I'd love
to. Ryan Thomas Frace, Freedom Architect. If you have any more questions, feel free to DM Ryan on his Instagram. Are you on Facebook too? You say you're on Facebook?
Yes, I am. Yeah. And my website as well is ryanThomasFrace.com. So,
and I really do appreciate the insight. And there's so much more that we could discuss, and we might leave it for another time, but it's certainly food for thought. And again, Ryan, this space is really for the brothers who just need some room, some space to get some of this out, so they get some sort of breathing space in. Because men often say, I'm not heard, I'm not loved. This is a chance for you to be heard. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop those questions in through to me, and I can pass them on to Ryan as well. Or you can DM Ryan on his Instagram page. Ryan Thomas Frace, thanks very much for being a part of the Awakening Man's Code podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.